Sophie and Ivan had tied the knot over 16 years ago. They first crossed paths when they were just past their 20s, falling head over heels in love at first sight. Throughout their marriage, they'd weathered many storms together. But as time wore on, the initial spark dimmed. They now resembled more of companions rather than lovers. Together, they were raising a teenage son, and both were engrossed in their work. One evening, after wrapping up their workday, they were having dinner when their son had already retreated to his room. Sophie turned to her husband. "Hey, I caught up with Naomi today," she began. Her husband can't join her for the seaside trip, she suggested. "Will you go to the sea together?" Ivan interrupted. "Yes, just the two of us. I thought I'd let you know." "You didn't have any immediate plans anyway," Sophie said nonchalantly, finishing the last bite of her meal. "Maybe you could wait for me. We could go together," Ivan suggested hesitantly. "I've got a week off now. Besides, I need to help out my friend. Otherwise, her vacation's shot." Despite trusting his wife, Ivan wasn't thrilled about the idea of separate vacations. Yet he understood she hadn't had a proper break in a while, and he couldn't take time off work anytime soon. Reluctantly, he agreed to let her go without him. A week later, Sophie left for her trip with her friend Naomi. As Ivan saw her off, she was radiating happiness. After all, her long-awaited vacation was near. Ivan, on the other hand, was in a gloomy mood, not prone to superstitions or hunches, but a bad feeling lingered. He attributed it to a restless night and headed straight to work. They spoke a couple of times on the phone, but mostly exchanged texts. Ivan's workdays were busy, and according to Sophie, she was thoroughly enjoying her vacation, sightseeing and exploring the surroundings. A week had passed since Sophie left. One evening, Ivan was at home, watching a comedy show on TV, when his boss called, urgently needing assistance. "Do you have a computer nearby? Check this out," the caller said. The only computer at home was his wife's laptop, which he hadn't used since setting up her new phone 6 months ago. He figured she wouldn't mind if he used it for 10 minutes of work, so he confidently opened it and logged in. While working on the documents his boss sent, he noticed new photos uploaded to the cloud from Sophie's phone. He had set it up this way for her convenience. Since Sophie hadn't sent him any photos, he was curious about what she was photographing. Opening the folder, he saw the usual pictures Sophie loved to take: food and nature. She had a knack for capturing beautiful dishes and landscapes. However, one detail caught his eye. In a cafe photo, he unexpectedly saw a man's hand on the table next to her. The man was clearly seated opposite his wife, with a drink and a plate in front of him, indicating he wasn't just a random passerby. From that moment, a seed of doubt took root in Ivan's mind. Later, he called his wife, but decided not to mention the photo. She spoke as usual, with no background noise, so he assumed she was in her room and not out and about. Sophie was raving about the incredibly polite hotel staff and how much she adored the place. But then, after some background noise, she abruptly cut off, saying she and her friend were about to go on an excursion and needed to leave. So she quickly said goodbye and ended the call. That day, Ivan had already taken his wife's laptop to work to keep an eye out for anything suspicious. He turned it on, expecting to see photos from the seaside trip. Instead, there were different photos. She clearly hadn't left the hotel room, as she later took pictures of a cart with beautifully presented dishes, fruits, and champagne. This definitely didn't fit the budget trip narrative with her friend, so Ivan immediately became wary. It seemed she was on a romantic date with someone. At that moment, he decided to act. He called her via video, but she didn't pick up. Ivan didn't give up and kept calling persistently. Finally, Sophie declined the call and messaged that it was too noisy on the boat for a conversation, and suggested they talk later. But her husband knew this was his chance to catch her lying, so he decided to provoke her. He texted that their son had been hit by a car, and something terrible was happening, making this call potentially the last chance to talk to him. Normally, he would never dare lie about something like that. But desperate times call for desperate measures. Sophie quickly ran to the balcony and called her husband back. A mother fearing for her child's life is ready to do anything. She wasn't thinking about how to explain her location. "Where's Miles? What happened?" She blurted out, but then realized her husband looked too calm for such a situation. The moment was perfect. Even, in a cold, commanding tone, asked his wife to show him the room she was in. Sophie, who started protesting against the cruel joke, wanted to end the conversation, but her husband said their marriage was under threat. He screamed at her, and she reluctantly pointed the camera at the window, showing the room behind her. Even the sunlight didn't stop him from seeing the man on the bed. Looking closer, he recognized his wife's colleague. Even had never loved him. He had already flirted with his wife, and even once had to physically point him in his place. But obviously, that didn't stop him. Even realized that Sophie had orchestrated this whole scheme to spend time with her lover, hoping her husband wouldn't suspect anything. But her plan had failed, and Even wasn't one to be deceived. He told her they were getting a divorce, and it wasn't up for discussion. Sophie started crying and saying something, but Even had already hung up. When Sophie returned to their shared apartment, it felt like she was visiting people who didn't want her there. She couldn't remember such a cold reception in her entire life, but she understood the reasons behind it. Even didn't hide anything from their son to prevent him from having false hopes of reconciliation. The boy was old enough to understand. His sympathy for his father and teenage rebellion led to him refusing to even talk to his mother. When they were dividing the apartment and moving out, he said he would only live with his father. Sophie was shocked by the news. She loved her son very much, but she understood that there was little she could do to change his mind. After the divorce, she tried to openly date her colleague. At first, everything seemed wonderful, and she even moved in with him after the division of the property. But then the lover seemed to change. He was no longer a sweet and courteous lover. He started mistreating her. Their relationship seemed more attractive when they were meeting in secret, probably because the forbidden fruit is sweet. But once you try it, disappointment eventually sets in. Even lived with his son for a while, but then the boy was preparing to go to university and move out into his new adult life. Even began dating other women, and among them, he found some who were more grateful and honest than his ex-wife. And even himself was no longer so skeptical about his intuition, as it had turned out to be his savior.